And one of the first things he said is, your book is on my shelf, which I thought was wonderful because, he obviously hadn't read it, but he didn't want me to think he had forgotten about it or something, and he was too honest to say anything else, but it was just very sweet.
Ladies and gentlemen, beloved of America!
Life is a very rich thing, and for anybody that is just involved in UFOs, God help you. You will go insane. You will lose your mind. It's very important to be able to bounce off your own walls and, have a good time and have fun.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Banal of America Audio with your host, Tim Banal.
What is going on, my friends? This is Tim Banal of BanalofAmerica.com with another edition of BoA Audio Season 6. Before we kick off the episode, let's plug our good buddy here, Pete Diggins, for providing the theme music for this installment of the program. You can find out more from Pete Diggins at www.aurophonic.com, AUROPHONIC.com. Check it out. I've gotten a ton of submissions from folks out there who want to have their music featured on the program, and now that we have taken care of a lot of the in-house stuff, I will be able to give a closer listen to their music. But if you want to send something in the interim, shoot me a line at boaaudio@hotmail.com, and I'd be happy to tune in to your tunes. I kind of alluded to it there, but let's make it official and short and sweet. The big audio migration over to Cyber Ears is complete. Our iTunes feed is fixed. The MP3 and streaming audio links at BoA are fully functional once again. So hopefully all the folks who lost us over the last few months are picking us back up again and catching up on all the episodes they may have missed the last few weeks. Welcome back, my friends. The show continues onward. Speaking of which, let's get down to business on this week's installment of BoA Audio. Our guest this week is my good friend and one of ufology's great thinkers, the amazing Peter Robbins. He's been on the program numerous times, and since I've known Peter for quite a while, he was really one of the guys who inspired me to keep going and digging into the paranormal. I pretty much went into this throwing the questions out the window and setting aside some time to talk to Peter and just seeing where the conversation went. As such, it's a little tough to really pinpoint the areas that we talk about, but I'm going to do my best here. We're going to touch on Rendlesham, of course, and the big Rendlesham 30th anniversary that happened back in December of 2010. We'll get into the malaise of ufology that has become a running theme here on the program over the last few months. Peter's going to weigh in on that and how he combats the fatigue of trying to study this enigma. We'll talk about 2012, the mainstream media and how they portray ETs and UFOs, and just the problems with the mainstream media in general, UFO skeptics, the alleged rapture event of May 21st, 2011, and what it says about society as a whole. We'll get reflective on a number of issues, get really meta in talking about what it's like being UFO researchers and how that changes your perspective on the world at large, and a whole bunch of big picture issues like what might be behind the UFO phenomenon and how difficult it is to really wrap your arms around that mystery. Altogether, really, it is a fast and loose conversation with someone I consider a very good friend in not just the world of the paranormal, but life in general. And as such, really, it is a fly by the seat of our pants conversation that just goes wherever it wants to go. And I think folks are really going to dig it. The incomparable Peter Robbins joins us here for a jam session covering the world of UFOs and so much more. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Peter Robbins, allow me to provide you with a little background on him. Peter Robbins has been involved in UFO studies for more than 25 years as a researcher, investigator, writer, lecturer, activist, and author. He is a board member of Bud Hopkins Intruders Foundation and is co-author of the British bestseller Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Bentwaters Woodbridge UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. Robbins has extensively lectured both in the United States and abroad, including dozens of talks throughout the United Kingdom. Venues have included local, national, and international conferences, as well as presentations for organizations, seminars, private groups, public, private, and secondary schools, universities, libraries, and scientific organizations, educational foundations, and Cambridge Hospital in Boston, under the sponsorship of the late Pulitzer Prize winner, Dr. John Mack. Peter has also served as art director and investigator for the New York City-based Scientific Bureau of Investigation, SBI, a national police and civilian UFO research organization, and as editorial assistant on the requested Blue Memorandum for Parliament's House of Lords debate on UFOs in January of 1980, and served as research assistant on the United Nations Secretary General's report for the establishment of a UN UFO department. Unfortunately, Peter does not have a website that we can plug here, but he is on Facebook, so head on over to Facebook, punch in Peter Robbins, so you can befriend him or get in touch with him or follow his work. With all that said, let's kick back, relax, and rock and roll. This interview was recorded on June 1st, 2011. Peter Robbins joins us for a ufological jam session on BoA Audio, Season 6. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of BoA Audio, Season 6. And last year, when I brought our guest back on the program in January of 2010, it was about 5 years since his previous appearance, and I promised him it wouldn't be another 5 years since he came back on the show. He's one of my very good friends. He's one of ufology's truly great thinkers, and someone I enjoy talking to and really pondering this mystery with. And he's overall really a genuinely great guy, one of the most well-thought-of people in the world of ufology. Everybody seems to love this guy and has just amazingly kind words to say about him. I've spent an enormous amount of time with him in person, hanging out in a variety of different venues, and you know, I can't put him over enough. I consider him a great friend, a mentor, someone who I turn to for advice, not just on matters UFO-related, but also life in general. Of course, he's the co-author of Left at East Gate with Larry Warren, and, you know, I could go on and on with the platitudes, but I want to actually start talking to him now. So welcome back to the show, Peter Robbins. It's going to be awesome.
Hi, Tim. And, yeah, the reason I'm so well-liked is I pay people to like me, and it works out. It is good to be back. It feels like it's only been 4 years.
Oh, man. Well, you know, we last chatted towards, I think, the middle of the summer, last summer, just for a little pop-in, but we had you on at length last January.
Yes.
So what have you been up to, you know, in the last 18 months or so?
Well, last year, major focus was the big events in Roswell. They always have 4 days in the beginning of July to coincide with the anniversary of the famous events of 1947. And for the past 3 or 4 years, I've worked for the city as a consultant and a coordinator of their symposium, and then moved on to, you know, some other small speaking dates. I picked up a column in the United Kingdom, and as of this past issue of UFO Matrix, they've been in business for a year, which is a great watermark.
Yeah.
I think, along with Open Minds, they're really the two best English language magazines right now on the subject. And the column is called On Assignment. It's a bi-monthly, and I believe it's now available in Barnes & Noble stores around the country.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. Otherwise, this past December and into January brought me back to Suffolk, England, because late December, between Christmas and New Year's, was the actual 30th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. And there was a small conference that took place on the exact 30th anniversary of the Third Night's events, the ones that my co-author Larry Warren was involved in. And it was an extremely memorable, quite emotional, very unique conference. And this year, it's a lot of writing, but in March, there was a conference in Lawrence, Kansas that may stand as a one-of-a-kind conference.
Mhm.
It was organized by two guys there who put up their own money and brought in 13 or 14 and some of the best-known names in UFO studies, and it was billed as the Reykjavik UFO Summit.
Okay, yeah, the name does ring a bell, yeah.
Yeah, and although, the attendance wasn't huge, there was about 600 people in and out over the weekend, and it was great seeing a number of those folks again. And now, of course, gearing up a bit long range for the upcoming Exeter Conference in September that we've been a part of the last few years, and that will be September 3rd, which is a Saturday. And although it's still coming together, we know that the main presenter is going to be Kathy Martin. And for anyone who, of course, follows this subject who has never heard Kathleen Martin speak, she is really a force in nature as far as I'm concerned. She's one of the greatest assets we have in that, she seems fairly quiet and sedate, and she's a nice grandmother with a background in social work and education. But she also happens to be Betty and Barney Hill's niece, and arguably was the closest person to Betty for the whole latter part of her life relative to this subject. And her presentations are extraordinary, and as many of our listeners know, this September, coordinated literally just a few short weeks away from the actual Exeter Conference, it will be the 50th anniversary of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. So that is one not to miss. And we understand, you and I, that there may be some other surprises, really big names involved.
Mm-hmm.
The program is not locked down yet, but I think that this will be the third annual one, and I think that they're building something really important there.
Yeah, it's gonna be quite a good time. So folks should definitely check that out. One of the things you just said that really piqued my interest here was you're saying you were at Bentwaters for the 30th anniversary, and you had a big conference there, and you said it was emotional. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, it's not a term we usually use for UFO studies or a conference, but this was one of a kind. Anybody that's followed this extraordinarily important UFO incident, far and away the best known and best documented UFO incident in the history of the United Kingdom, certainly knows my co-author's name, Larry Warren. Larry was, at the time, an airman first class with a secret security clearance and a member of the United States Air Force Security Police, and was involved as an eyewitness in the third night's events. But other names have now, over the past years, started to, come into the public mindset, two of which are John Burroughs and Jim Peniston, who were involved earlier on. And my friend and colleague Linda Howe, although she's best known for her animal mutilations, work, crop circle, and other things, she has done some terrific research on this case, and for the last few years has been working in great part with John Burroughs, and more recently with Jim Peniston as well, although I don't know if they still are. She even did a very extensive interview with Larry Warren the year before we started working together, 1986, which is posted in several parts on her Earth Files website. But she and I and Jim and John were the speakers at this conference, and it was held in Woodbridge, Suffolk. Woodbridge is the nearest town, maybe less than a dozen miles from the sites of the events. And Larry was there basically to just say hi. He very generously deferred when we were asked to speak, and said, people in the UK who follow this are overall fairly familiar with my account because of our book and a lot of time on television, and many of them are not familiar with Jim and John's account, and I thought it took a lot of class. But we basically bowed out as keynotes. Larry in particular, and Jim and John kind of dominated the night. And Jim and John were involved on the first night, and both of them, even more than Larry, I realize now, the disturbances that they are still living with, the post-traumatic stress, in some cases, the knowledge that memories from that event that John in particular, but certainly Jim as well, are not sure about which memories are absolutely real or were implanted by American intelligence, not, these other intelligences.
Yeah.
And the audience, we kept resetting the chairs the day before to maximize the community center. And every time we did, I'd take a count and, measure and just pushing the fire eggs to the max.
Yeah.
Got about 380 chairs in there, but we did have over 400 people. And the thing about it, Tim, was I'd say a good solid 3/4 of them were local. And this was the story they grew up with. Some of them were kids at the time, other ones now, certainly seniors. There was quite a handful of local witnesses, of retired British military, of English witnesses overall. And the other quarter of the audience came in from all over the place. But these people most of them knew every aspect of the story as well as it had been published, and they were angry. They were still angry at the British for lying about it. They were certainly still angry at the Americans for covering it up, and they were angry that they weren't getting some of the straight answers that they would have really preferred. In fact, I'm not saying any punches were thrown, but it's the first UFO conference I ever spoke at where a bunch of fights broke out in the audience.
Like arguments?
And it was basically, a speaker would say something, and somebody would yell something like, no, that's a blah, blah, and the other person would correct them, and then they'd get into a thing. So it wasn't, a soccer match, but they were emotional. And Jim and John were emotional. Jim told me at one point that night, the first night when he and John were out there in the forest, and, there was this machine that he made the famous notes on, copied out the markings on it, touched it. It was the worst night of his life. All of these guys have burned through marriages, have health problems. Jim and John, and I'm talking out of school here, they are both seeing therapists. They have both been, I think, very forthcoming in allowing parts of video of their sessions, their hypnotic regression sessions with their therapists, to be used in coordination with some of the talks that they've done with Linda. And it was very moving and alternately frustrating, enraging that these guys were put through this, fascinating. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. At one point, John Burroughs was on stage. He's a tall guy. He's got to be like 6'5", 6'6".
Yeah.
But he just looks kind of haunted, and he's the first one to say, he's just never been the same since this. Question: John, is it true that when you came upon the machine in the woods, you drew your service weapon on it and went into a two-handed stance and then reholstered it? John: I may have. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was a real memory or not. John, is it true, as I've heard, that you impulsively threw yourself on the thing and it took off and went like 30 feet with you on it? I may have, but I may not have. I don't know whether it's a real memory or one they put in my head. John, were you abducted? I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. It was intense. And with the exception of a break, I started it out with under an hour presentation. Linda got up there, did her usually professional thing. Then Jim and John got up there, and then Nick came up, and we took a lot of questions. And after more than 5 hours, we were emotionally tired. We were tired. They were working on a documentary at the same time. Jim or John said, we know you're all pretty beat. It's, like 20 after 11 now, and this is a ferociously rough winter in England. Said, we know that we put on the website that if any of you were interested after the conference, we would take you out to Eastgate, the East Gate of Woodbridge, where we were when it all happened, and try to recreate it for you. But we realize it's late, etc. Anybody still interested in going? And about half the hands in the room went up. And it was, again, like close to 11:30. And I'd say about 40 minutes later, at least 150 people were pulling themselves together at the pre-appointed place in the forest. All of us who came were prepared, 2 pairs of socks, flashlights, all that stuff. And we walked the half-mile or so up Eastgate Road with John and Jim and the Larry, other people, Brenda Butler, a famous local researcher, a whole bunch of folks, right back to where it all started. And a film team from, I think, the History or Discovery Channel. I forget which one's working on this thing. And they spent half hour, 40 minutes or so recreating it for us, and it was intense. I mean, I've been out there more times than I can think over the past 23 years, at night, during the day, in the winter, the summer, but not like that. And so, yeah, it was a heck of a conference, and for any of us that felt, forget about the word closure, but that it might, sew up some loose ends and things, we all left there just more fascinated, frustrated, curious, tired, pissed off than we were before. This case, as Larry once said, this one's never going to go away.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to be heading back to Suffolk in a couple of months for another conference, but I don't think I'll ever be able to let this one go for the rest of my life. It is just part of my DNA right now, and spend that much time focusing in on one event and its ramifications on the lives of human beings, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting case too, because it's they call it the British Roswell, but it happened so recently that we can really see the fallout much clearer.
Well, you're right, Tim. And again, the name, the British Roswell, is a good enough term based on the fact that it's as famous there as Roswell is here. Not that Roswell isn't famous there as well, but that's about where it stops. And you're right, not only is it more contemporary, but, the last of the old guard of anybody associated with the Roswell events are coming into the home stretch, where literally everybody that was involved in this incident, I'm sure with a small number of exceptions, is alive, hopefully well. And if our elected officials ever had the courage to look into this again in congressional investigation, that ain't going to happen with this group of jerks. This would be the case. This would be the one that could bust it open. All the more reason that they're not going to want to even take a look at it. But it is fascinating. It continues to be the subject of declassified material, although the big story relative to it in March was a BBC story from, I think, March 3rd, saying that Her Majesty's government had declassified and posted, I don't know, another 8,000 or 10,000 pages of mid-level UFO documents on Ministry of Defense website. But the big story was that all of the documents relating to Rendlesham were missing. And the next day, on March 4th, the New York Times, true to form, published a article where they tried to mock it. It was a little difficult, but they took some shots at it and, used the silly kind of terminology that they do. Had a very interesting photograph that they even had there. But the big story for me, talk about contempt for the truth, was that they never even mentioned that several, possibly 1,000 pages, but certainly several hundred, we're not given a number. We were just told a substantial amount of data, all on Rendlesham, was missing. And they didn't even refer to it in passing. And, to add insult to injury, they always have to bring in Roswell. And, of course, in Britain, this thing is thought of as a big deal, but much like in America, where some people claim that a UFO landed in New Mexico in 1947. And, with all of the wacky distortions about the Roswell incident, I've never heard anybody even, refer to that possibility. It's always a crash.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just one more way to thumb your nose at, even in their case, at the myth, legend, and lore, if they don't, if they want to make believe that it didn't happen. But to say that it's allegations of a landing is beyond contempt. Way to go, New York Times. Keep it up.
Yeah. It's well, the whole thing with the files going missing. Does anyone really believe that? I just presume that they just wouldn't release them. They just took them.
No. In fact, that was the big BBC story, that they were in somehow this batch of ones that had been cleared, again, we're talking about what you and I would call mid-level or low-level files, maybe some interesting smoke, but certainly no smoking gun. No, there's not going to be some disclosure-related event that's going to be triggered because of any of these documents. But the big story was, yes, these things were slated for release. They had been cleared, but they're missing. They're missing. And methinks the lady doth protest too much. It's so interesting the way that the power brokers continue to dance around this and evade it and do their best to show us a shiny object. Oh, I noticed in today's New York Times, the Oxygen Network is going to bring back Paris Hilton for her new reality show where she has a miniature pony and a Bentley that's painted pink, and we get to watch her go to clubs and things. I mean, give me a break. But this is the America that we've grown into. Thank God, I'm sure some of these people in power say for Britney Spears and Charlie Sheen that they are the shiny objects, or these Jersey Shore jerks. It's a little embarrassing and kind of enraging that we have so many people in this country who are so easily entertained by something beyond nonsense when, well, at the least, there's reruns of Law and Order. You can always get into those.
Well, you wonder how much is just they've had the fight beaten out of them in a sense.
Well, I think that's a good point. And again, the ridicule factor, which I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of human behavior in the post-war years, is still alive and well and attaching itself to UFOs and unrelated subjects, although I think every year another respectable tiny percentage of people crosses the line.
Yeah.
And they don't care, what their friends and neighbors think about the fact that they take it seriously. That is a positive point, and I see it a little more every year here and in the UK especially. But we're still, considerable distance from that critical mass.
Well, that brings me to sort of another big point that I did want to talk about with you, and it's sort of a nice natural segue into that. And that's just, you've been interested in this for 30-plus years. And we did a year in review episode with Greg Bishop and Nick Redfern, and we all sort of had the same feeling in a sense that there's just, I guess I call it the malaise, this malaise right now where it feels like ufology's spinning its wheels a little bit. There hasn't been really anything to get excited about in a long time, and plus we're dealing with a lot of, parties within ufology such as, the disclosure crowd, let's say, that are taking it in directions that aren't exactly what I think are best for the field in the long run. So it's like a double, it's like the old school ufology sort of wavering or spinning its wheels, and this new generation or new party that's come along is also sort of problematic. So I mean, how do you deal with the malaise? Because you're always you have so much going on, and you have so many different avenues, and you write about so much different stuff. And every time I read new stuff from you, it's like an amazing new take on the different stuff. So it's like, how do you generate the interest? How do you keep it going?
Yeah. Well, I think, you, Nick and Greg, I'm sorry I missed that show. You guys have, you're such amazing individuals and come at this from three wonderfully unique directions. But I think that your take on it is correct. That's a good term to use. There's no sexy new monster case taking everybody's attention. The most important two books last year were appropriately, in my estimation, dry and academic as they should have been, but a very important one was the second installment of Rich Dolan's three-part series, UFOs in the National Security State. The other, far and away, was Leslie Kean's fine book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Speak Out. But it's not like there was another Intruders or, another major new thing, the abduction phenomena. Yes, it's going on. And yes, last year, as far as I'm concerned, the two top people in the field were horribly and overwhelmingly irrationally attacked. In one case by somebody who David Jacobs was working with, who I consider a borderline personality. In the other case, Bud Hopkins' ex-wife. And, there are a lot of what I would call ankle biters and people watching from the wings who say, oh, gosh, maybe they are wrong. And so, in certain circles, there's been a re-questioning of their methodology or, their findings, etc. Bud is quite ill, so, he's not been speaking out very much. As far as me personally, I just keep doing my work, and I try as much as possible to reach different audiences with different presentations. Friday, I'm heading up to Buffalo, New York, for a weekend with Western New York MUFON. I'll be giving an investigators workshop for trained MUFON UFO investigators. But for me, I'm coming at it in a very personal way, starting with my realization from what my dear sister Helen told me 35 years ago about her abduction experience, which blew my mind and changed my life. And although I read, the MUFON Investigator's Handbook early on, I've never qualified. But I've learned a lot as an independent and doing crisis intervention work and traveling a lot, and through my work as Bud's assistant for many years, certainly a lot of hands-on techniques, and a lot of it comes down to just being a decent person, a good listener, and giving people the respect that they need as they're going through what they're going through. But in the evening, we're going to take a look at that great sci-fi channel when it was the SCI-FI, as opposed to what it is now. That was made about Rendlesham. Give him a background on it. We'll watch it together. I've got a talk that I'll be doing on Wilhelm Reich's UFO-related work this summer for an international conference on Reich in Europe. A talk for a Tesla conference on Wilhelm Reich in Pennsylvania. The second weekend of July, I'll be doing a talk on James Forrestal. I think part of it for me is just getting people through the door.
Yeah.
So I like to couch as much of it as possible in post-war American history and lay it on such a tightly woven timeline with real, kosher, above-board, genuine events, and weave in the documents and the cover-up in a way that any really straight, extremely circumspect person can deal with. The other thing is, like you, working behind the scenes a bit to help local municipalities, that handful of them that have, a right, a heritage to have an event, to help them, get themselves up and running. It started for me with the McMinnville Festival, and when I first started working with them in Oregon in 2003. You and I now are very proud of our work with Exeter, New Hampshire for their September event, me with Roswell, and also this year joining the ranks is a tiny little town you could blink as you go by it. It's about 2 hours north of Manhattan, called Pine Bush. I knew it because when my sister Ann first started her first nursing job was at a little clinic there. But it's sort of like Bonnie Bridge, Scotland, in that it has the highest statistical confirmed analysis of sightings, anomalous events in the woods, multiply witnessed, stuff in the sky, of any community in New York State. And they had their first one-day UFO festival and conference about 6 weeks ago, and it went quite well. So that's another thing. The other is to network with other folks in the field, to try not to, get down about what you and Nick and Greg so well defined, because part of it is I'm one of the rare people who's crazy enough to actually be trying to make my living doing this, and of course I'm a wonderful role model for descending into poverty. Not on food stamps. I'm living very nicely for where I am, but I'm only half joking. It's a terrible career, but it's important work. Terrible career in terms of earnings, but I'm really proud of the contributions I've made. I head into New York next week to do some work with the Sundance channel, which for the first time, as far as I know, is putting together an originally produced show, a documentary on this subject, and they have a wonderful track record. And every time that I get involved in something like that, where I know somebody in the media is trying to buck the system and pull together something that is respectful, quality, letting the chips fall where they may, it just picks me up and off I go, and it's a great feeling to be involved in something like that. But I'm not sure what it's going to take to get us out of this. MUFON, of course, is another thing. MUFON has been through all kinds of pandemonium the last less than a year, with accusations flying here and there, with people quitting, state section leaders being fired. I feel for everybody, and hope that MUFON can straighten itself out, and that the folks who have left from there continue with the great contributions they've made, either on their own or with new organizations, or however you want to deal with it. I think one of the main things here, Tim, is when you're dealing with a subject that is so vilified, that is so distorted, that is so outsider, that is so important, that so many people in power want to go away, and that those of us that really lend our work, our attention, our intentions to, and some people burn out, or move on to more practical, aspects of life, and this becomes an avocation or a hobby, which I can certainly understand. For me, it's important work, and you do what you have to do to continue forward in it, even if it's treading water in a creative way. And you look at somebody like Nick Redfern. I'm proud to say I knew Nick before he wrote a book, and now he's written 187.
Yeah.
And they're all terrific. I love the guy, and he's a wonderful presenter and a very gutsy researcher who gets in between the lines, crosses over into paranormal, cryptozoology, will really look hard at and write a book at something that's considered an unpopular theory, like, did Roswell really happen, or was it a series of other events that made people believe it was? That went over really big in Roswell when I heard him speak on that a couple of years ago.
I'm sure, yeah.
And you know what? I just was so impressed because that is the kind of intellectual curiosity and drive, I think, that makes people talk and think and move forward in this field. Greg, as a great paranormalist, a raconteur, a rational skeptic, he's just another wonderful asset. You are now a regular fixture around the world with your radio show in this amazing era of internet radio, where anybody like you who develops an audience, it just keeps expanding. Maybe not geometrically, but arithmetically. And more people listen. There's good word of mouth. It's amazing what you can do with guerrilla promotion or self-promotion right now. And when all fails, or is said and done, for me, I am one of those people who have, a whole bunch of other passionate interests, whether it's photography or history or theater or architecture. I was lucky enough to get away to Canada about 2 weeks ago and spent a week in Stratford, which is probably the largest concentration of actors living in one town in North America.
Oh, wow.
And it's filled with theaters, and 2/3 of the year, it's just alive with activity. And my friends and I went to see 2 plays, one an adaptation of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and the other, The Merry Wives of Windsor, one of the few Shakespeare plays I had not seen. And dig this, about 10 minutes before curtain, I'm going through the program, huge theater in like 2/3.
Yeah.
I see that the lead, character named Falstaff is played by a marvelous Canadian actor who's an old friend of mine who I managed to play for in New York 6 years ago.
Oh, weird.
And he was sensational. I was waiting for him at the stage door. It was a great reunion. And one of the first things he said is, your book is on my shelf, which I thought was wonderful because, he obviously hadn't read it, but he didn't want me to think he had forgotten about it or something, and he was too honest to say anything else, but it was just very sweet. Anyway, life is a very rich thing, and for anybody that is just involved in UFOs, God help you.
I know, yeah.
You will go insane. You will lose your mind. It's very important to be able to bounce off your own walls and, have a good time and, just get in there and have fun.
Yeah.
And lighten the hell up sometimes because this stuff sometimes makes you feel like you're carrying around the weight of the world.
Exactly.
And that is not the way it should be.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something we've talked about a lot on the show is that need to have other interests and not take this too seriously because, a lot of great people have dedicated their lives and come and gone and didn't get any answers. So
it's true, and we will or we won't. And as far as the disclosure movement goes and exopolitics, I think overall we have a lot of good people, especially in Europe, which we don't hear about that much here, who have formed these kind of activist groups where they put on their own conferences where, if they're overzealous, maybe better that than, not being involved at all, where their aim is to begin to educate government officials and the public at large, and more power to them. I think the notion that had been pushed for some time here that especially when President Obama was coming into office, that because, one of his key advisors was John Podesta, who we know was on record as taking the subject of excessive UFO secrecy seriously, that disclosure was, 3.5 days away, and of course that was nonsense. But at the same time, I understand the positive impulse to try to break through this in that way. I just don't feel that it's going to happen, certainly not quite yet. And in a funny way, I think Rich Dolan nailed it down in a way when asked, what do you think disclosure is going to happen with our government? And he said words to the effect of, I don't think the United States government, and I'm very much paraphrasing here for just listening, I don't think the United States government is ever going to willingly, declassify and disclose what it has about this subject, but I think disclosure is inevitable. And I think what he meant by that, in the way that I feel, more and more the past few years that we've seen phenomena like, although it is quite unique on its own, WikiLeaks. I think about when I was younger and Daniel Ellsberg released this tremendous amount of information on the Vietnam War, and it was a tremendous embarrassment to the government, but it did change things to some degree. And perhaps, if they don't kill Julian Assange or lock him away in a tiny dungeon for the rest of his life, that he will most certainly, they have released some UFO information, but it's not out of the question that it may come that way. Who knows? Maybe it'll come at us through an unknown source and just somebody will dump it onto the internet.
Yeah.
Then there are, of course, the wild cards of them. If they ever want us to know that they are here en masse, as opposed to, a few people at a time in sightings or abductions, all they have to do is one of my favorite science fiction scenarios, the beginning of the original tacky made-for-TV miniseries and the kind of creepy remake of it. But I must say, as science fiction, alien-related premises go, I thought it was one of the great kick-ass starts of anything. It's up there with Jules Verne or H.G. Wells or Gene Roddenberry, simply that, 60 honkin' huge motherships pull in over the 60 biggest cities in the world, and they just hang there for a couple of months. Game over. And then, of course, it degenerates into every World War II resistance movie I've ever seen in my life, except that instead of Nazis, it's, these male and female modelly-looking aliens here to cure cancer, but really they take off their plastic skins and they're reptiles who eat us and mice and are not here for good purposes. So it could change at any moment,
right?
Or it could change not at all, or years from now, or decades, or in a year. It keeps it interesting, but again, I think most of our friends are sleepwalking their way through this. We're not conspiracists. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're not, strange people. We just are onto something that a lot of people either don't have the time or are not comfortable, and God knows who is, looking into and are doing flighty, inconsequential things like paying their bills, raising healthy children, working and keeping their mortgages up. And of course, I'm being sarcastic here. These are the most important things in life for most people, and more power to them. And this, the fact that we do this shouldn't change goals like, having a business or falling in love or getting into a great relationship or, doing other things that make a difference in the world or in our own little worlds. So that's the long answer to your short question.
No, that was perfect. I mean, yeah, you nailed a lot of things that are key here. And I think listening to you just now, it just struck me too that in a way, and maybe I didn't never consider this, although I've been kind of thinking this over the past few weeks myself.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in a way that we can pursue this, because there's a lot of people that I talk to people, I run into people that you tell them what you do, you tell them, this field that we're in, and then, their eyes light up and they're interested in this subject, but they don't have the wherewithal or the time to pursue it.
Well, the fact is, we sacrifice quite a bit to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The security of a regular job or living a more, straight out kind of life, but we made these choices. Nobody forced us to do it. And I think you're right. Through the miracle of Facebook, which I joined initially last year to primarily be more accessible to readers and people who have heard me on great shows like yours or seen me on television or heard me speak at a conference. And it's been very gratifying to have so many folks in that category jump into my life and ask questions or occasionally just check in or say hi or, study the thing more. But the biggest kick for me has been people that have come out of the woodwork of my past, whether it was when I was at the University of Bridgeport 1,000 years ago or student at the School of Visual Arts, or I was back and forth this morning twice with a woman who is now married and has grown-up kids, but I still remember her as this cute little girl with a bowl haircut that sat near me in the first grade. And I haven't seen her in, more years than I want to say,
yeah.
But we're still friends, and we go back and forth every couple of weeks. I did a talk at ARE, the Edgar Cayce Foundation's headquarters in New York City, where they occasionally have UFO speakers, about 6 weeks ago. And one of my best buddies from high school showed up, and I hadn't seen him since like the 60s. And he's a doctor now, and he brought his wife and son, and it was so much fun and so exciting and so touching. And, it's like, wow, I can't believe you're doing this, man. It's like, wow, I can't believe you became a doctor.
Yeah.
So, as Sonny and Cher used to say, the beat goes on.
Exactly, yeah. Now, here's something that I'd be interested in getting your perspective on. Not necessarily, what you think is going to happen and all that foolishness, but this whole 2012 thing. I mean,
oh, God.
It's building up, and I've warned people, and I was out having drinks with a buddy of mine who's interested in the field to a degree around, I think it was the day before the big rapture a few weeks ago.
Well, that was, of course, the before and after of all our lives, and I was amazing watching the 400,000 most devout Christians ascend to heaven, and of course, have all the demons poking us with pitchforks now, although it doesn't feel much different than it did before the rapture.
No. But it goes to it. I was saying to him, I watched a lot of, it surprisingly got a lot of coverage on the TV. I thought it was this little sort of esoteric thing that not too many people knew about. And of course, multiply that times like 100, it's going to be 2012. And I said, the joke's on us here in the field, in a sense, because they're not laughing with us, they're laughing at us, even if we don't believe in the 2012 thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up several very important points, Tim. Number one, with all due respect to anyone's and everyone's religious beliefs, my feelings, the way that I was brought up in a Reformed Jewish family, to understand that the Old Testament is not just true stories related from ancient times, that it was earlier myths, analogies, allegories, morality lessons, fables with a lesson attached to them, and that the idea of prophecy and justifying everything based on it being written down is something that fundamentalist religious thinkers follow. Fundamentalism, by the way, extends across the world of every religion, and it simply refers to completely rigid thinking that things are exactly the way that you interpret them or your leaders interpret them. There is no room for any kind of interpretation. It is just the way it is. And I have gone nose to nose with more fundamentalist Christian UFO researchers than anybody in ufology, as far as I know. And I have put out a standing invitation to go one-on-one or two-on-one or whatever with any of those folks that want to go on stage with me. I don't know Scripture as well as they do, but prophecy rarely. I don't remember the last time where, some major prediction relative to, somebody's religious beliefs came to pass on this earth. And frankly, the fact that the folks out there, especially in the media, oh, you're into UFOs, well, you must be interested in ghosts too, and reincarnation, and 2012. Well, maybe, yeah, but the point is, to lump it all together is not just muddying the waters, it's condescending, it's insulting, it's a way of demeaning, the serious work that we do. But, so much of 2012 prophecy is based on the Mayan calendar. Not that I know anyone that is fluent in Mayan. They just dig all this pop culture stuff that it's going to be the end of the world.
Yeah.
I think that there's a slight misinterpretation there. I think that the Mayan calendar suggests that in 2012, correct or not, we'll find out, there will be a shift in universal thinking or something that will not end life on Earth, will in fact, cause a change of some sort in our perception of ourselves, or that they may have simply done the math not quite right, and, the same way that these jerks, and I don't know what else to say, that put forward that the ascension into heaven, that the end times were upon us 2.5 weeks ago, this primarily came from a multimillionaire evangelical radio host who sat down and did a lot of math and said that, it was going to happen 2.5 weeks ago. And what really got to me was a few days before, I was listening to National Public Radio, as I sometimes do, and they were doing a series of interviews with folks who were taking this very seriously, fundamentalist Christian people, who were certainly decent, hardworking, I would hope kind, life-affirmative folks, living their lives, working their jobs, paying their mortgages, raising their kids, who were so convinced it was going to happen, Tim, that they had quit their jobs. They were spending their savings. They were just reading Scripture and spending time with their family, waiting to either ascend to heaven or to be left behind, as they say. And they're in even more financial trouble now than they were.
Right.
This, to me, is unconscionable. And it's the thing that really gets to me the most. But I think it's absolute nonsense. And I would bet you dollars to donuts there will be people, a tiny handful, even if it's one, who at some point after we're not all destroyed in flaming cataclysm in a year and a half or so, will actually be going to court and using as a defense for having to default on a loan or something that, Your Honor, I thought it was the end of the world. So I was just acting according to what my religious philosophy dictates. Mark my words, there's going to be some puff piece on the news about it. And I'm not trying to make fun of these people. I think it's tragic. It is so easy to mislead people, and more we're seeing it with our leaders who are more and more under the influence of corporatists and people who are just moving the money around, from folks who used to be middle class, who are now more and more in the serf category, to the super rich, and making believe it's about safety and patriotism and freedom and all of this crap. And those things are not crap, but the illusion that they're perpetrating on the American public is unconscionable. It's treasonous as far as I'm concerned. And, these people should be rid out of town on a rail, as they say. But I don't know what we do to stop it. We, the people, are getting railroaded. And it's no different in the world of UFO studies, where for every quality contribution, and again I point back to, say, Leslie Kean's fine book last year, there are going to be folks in positions of tremendous power that are going to be biting the ankles of people like Leslie, or looking to take them down overtly or covertly, or innuendo or suggestion. And the newest kind of example of this in opposite form is a book that came out really about 3 weeks ago or so by a writer with the Los Angeles Times, a technology correspondent, as I recall, named Jacobson, and it's a book on the history of Area 51.
Yeah.
And, her sources have let her know in no uncertain terms, and, of course, they're quality sources, and she went with them, that all this UFO stuff is nonsense, and, it has nothing to do with the history of this highly classified test range and military facility in Nevada, which, by the way, is bigger than Holland. I've been as close as you can get without getting shot at it. And it's just beyond belief how large it is, although out west, spaces go on. And that book is probably a good book in other respects, but it will help perpetrate the myth that, this whole UFO thing, and right now in terms of black technology, whether it's back engineering or what have you, is nonsense, and certainly any association with other intelligence, highly advanced craft, and that mythical base, that legendary base, scholars, thinkers, people with degrees, folks who take themselves seriously, going to read the book. And, well, it's in the book, so, she wouldn't have gotten that wrong. She's a smart, well-connected reporter. And so the mind will continue to reinforce itself around that misnomer.
Pardon the interruption, but I'm Mike Robot. Tony, some people believe the world will come to an end tomorrow. What are you going to do between now and then?
I'm Tony Kornheiser. Eat something I've never tried before, like a hamster.
You're listening to Banal of America Audio.
Have you seen Facebook ever in your life?
No, I haven't.
You might want to take a look.
I used to see Redbook when I went to beauty parlors with my mom.
I'm sure.
That's a long time ago.
Well, this is about as harmless as that.
The difficult part, too, with that whole thing, especially what you're talking about here with the Area 51 book, is that, a lot of people won't read the book, but they'll just see her on some segment on CNN, or I think she was on The Daily Show even.
Yes.
And then that's all people will, it's like the Doug and Dave thing with the crop circles, they'll just be,
and
I saw the lady on The Daily Show, and it's not true that there's,
You're absolutely right, because that, of course, will be one of the first questions that she's asked, and I'm sure she'll smile knowingly and, shake her head and explain as carefully as she can that her research, which, of course, is, I'm sure, high quality and very scholarly in most, if not all respects outside of this particular aspect, is, of course, these folks who long to believe in life in the universe and a new pantheon of gods to take us away from our, earthbound problems. And, it's a shame that it gets kind of associated with serious government projects and real science and real history. And the majority of the public will believe it because every single major media outlet is owned by a corporation. NBC is owned by GM, a huge, huge monster government contractor, and so on down the line. So, even good old CNBC or other seemingly more open venues are going to, be seen as, well, that's just a lefty station. And what do they know? You got to pick through your sources. There's a handful of them that I keep going back to, and, they're independents often or not owned by major corporations, and that's why folks don't hear about them.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily Leslie Kean did get some good mainstream media press, too.
Question.
She put the book out.
Absolutely. The book was very well received by a surprising number of folks in the so-called straight world, and I think it was a very good strategic decision of Leslie, who is a fine journalist and a quality writer, to decide, rather than to write treatments of these distinguished military pilots or generals or respected government officials who have been willing to put their accounts on the line, rather than do extensive interviews with them and write them up, to invite them to write their own chapters in the book and then bracket it with her own work. It is one of those books that I think belongs at the same level as Tim Good's seminal Above Top Secret, Rich Dolan's two fine volumes on UFOs in the national security state, and a small handful of other books that you can always hold your head up and loan out to, the worst skeptic or debunker and say, you want to argue with me or make fun of what I know is true? Read this, get back to me in a couple of months, and let's sit down and talk. It blasts them out of the water. They're just exhausting on a certain level to fight against and rationalize against and, just spin your own wheels until you say, maybe there is something to this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are all fantastic books. Well, it does seem like there's this. You wonder if the Area 51. I'm sure it was in the works for a while, but it seems like it's almost like a pushback against what has been sort of a better treatment of UFOs in the last few years. So maybe there's like this PR war going on that we're unaware of.
Yes, it may well be. Either, there is some overseeing group that will intercede in a way or commission a project or encourage a project here or there, or it is just the natural human tendency of certain folks out there to say, oh, enough of this UFO nonsense.
Yeah.
It's time for me to put my PhD to good use and flatten this nonsense once and for all. In fact, I'm one of those people that subscribe to the theory that there are very few agent provocateurs out there, and that there are an awful lot of useful scholars and useful idiots that simply jump into the roles and don't need much encouragement. This summer, we're going to see a whole new spate of, alien and UFO movies. The one I'm looking forward to the most is the Spielberg movie, which has got to have one of the best titles in years, Cowboys and Aliens.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to go back to the Old West, and I'm wondering how much of it is sort of intertwined with the myth, legend, lore, fact of that famous late 19th century Texas case.
The Aurora.
Which I love. It's a wonderful story about, a machine from parts unknown that crashes in this small town in Texas, and this being that they protect and hide and ultimately give a decent funeral to when it passes. Happened, didn't happen, who knows? There is actually a film version that I don't think if it was theatrically released, it coasted through. It's talking about 1986 or so. It's called the Aurora Incident. If you can ever find it, maybe it's available through Netflix or something. It's completely disarming. It's a very good-spirited film. It's very affecting and touching, and just one of those things that makes you think. But again, this spring the movie Paul, about the slacker goofball alien, who smokes pot and talks the way that any contemporary hipster would, and is played by, what's his name?
Seth Rogen was the voice.
You got it. Yeah, how perfectly cast. It was fun. It was goofy. It was lighthearted. And I don't think that demeans, serious studies. There was nothing mean-spirited or condescending about it. It was just, a send-up, so to say. And we're going to see that around controversial topics for as long as there are controversial topics. I think in a way it's a good, steam valve or release. We have to be able to laugh at this stuff, and the best people in the field, as far as I'm concerned, have some of the most sensational senses of humor, because if we can't laugh about it, God help us.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you touched on it, too, earlier, that every year it seems like a little bit more people sort of cross the line. I do think it's a generational thing in a lot of ways, where, as the next generation comes along, this thing will take on a new flavor, if you will.
Yeah. Well, you reminded me of one of my favorite quotes by I'm trying to remember whether he was a Nobel Prize winner, but a very distinguished scientist, Max Planck, and the quote is, "Science proceeds, one funeral at a time." Yeah, the old guard sometimes has to vaporize before it is a more accepted fact or predisposition or philosophical construct that more people are comfortable with. And I think that is the case now. We have a generation of 20 and even 30-somethings that have never been alive without a certain amount of pop culture feedback, in part generated by very well-written scripts in the first 7 of the 10 years of The X-Files and a number of other, great shows and treatments and very hip movies, where, what else is new? And you talk to any kid, and it's like, do you believe in life in outer space? And they look at you like you're crazy, like, as opposed to what? Of course, even the most conservative, reactionary, condescending toward UFO astronomer will easily concede that there are likely millions of Earth-sized planets from sun-sized stars, where that primordial ooze and possibility of the chemistry coming together, or if you're theologically inclined, the miracle of creation taking hold and not having, a life form based on silicone or ammonia, but on carbon and oxygen and those good things like we have. But of course, they've never been here. And if they were, they would know. Of course, they're looking up when it's right behind them. And of course, they're not going to read any of these silly UFO books. They're serious scientists or, practitioners of history or what have you. And I wouldn't even lower myself to that. I mean, they can't be good. If it was a real subject, we in the more intellectual or educated or scientific community would know. For me, the mantra for folks like that is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. On to the next subject.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. You wonder when it's going to turn around, if it's going to be an organic thing or if it's going to be, like we were saying here, something that could be that's forced out. Do you know what I mean? It'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Well, I think it's basically a chess game on some level where we don't see the pieces being moved, but we know, or can, I think, rationally assume that within the highest levels of the world's insider intelligence communities, or however you want to see it or say it, you have probably individuals that do feel it is long overdue and are, in tense standoffs or in constant debate with other folks who say no. It's like the pearl around the original little grain of sand now is so big. And forget about the fallout from disclosure. All of the initial things that would have to be set in motion, because no one world leader can do this, would have to be coordinated with leaders around the world. Everybody would have to be prepared for any eventuality and possibility. I like to think sometimes that there are coordinated educational things going on behind the scenes to prepare us. Look at what the Roman Catholic Church has been doing the last 20 years. Of all of the controlling, conservative, dead set in their ways, religions in the world, the Catholic Church is really leading the way to, at the least, hold seminars, open conferences on the likelihood of other intelligences in outer space coming and going with impunity. They're at least doing something to prepare their flocks, to give prelates an opportunity to debate how should we deal with this. But the fact that they are openly conceding that, yes, we are not alone, and we should be prepared for the possibility of having to, acknowledge this publicly at some point in the future. I don't know what their ulterior motives are. I think sometimes it's behind, all of the interesting possibilities that simply, hey, these beings, even if they have their own religion or they're spiritual, they've got to be brought to the true faith. So we got to breed a whole bunch of recruiters here to bring them to Christ, and that is what it's all about, or else they're going to die in eternal damnation. And I don't care why they're doing it. I just think it's kind of interesting and in its own strange way a lot healthier than repressing the possibility or not having it be anything even remotely open to discussion within most religious factions, Judeo-Christian, Hindu, Islam, Buddhists take it. Well, Buddhists are kind of, they're open to so much of change and inevitability and on a certain level rolling with the cosmic punches. They really are more in a class by themselves. However, when you play with a cat and you stick your hand under like a blanket and you move your hand around and the cat gets really animated and gets very involved, cats are super smart animals. The cat knows your hand is under the blanket, but it is still playing the game with you because play is an elevated form of experience. Now, that's the way I see history sometimes. The hand is moving under the blanket, and we're reacting to the blanket moving and ascribing all kinds of meaning and things, but something else is going on. And it's something to ponder.
Now, you've referenced sort of like the them behind the UFO phenomenon, and I think that, in a way, trying to determine the makeup of what the them is sort of an exercise in futility, of course.
Oh yeah, it's a big wheel spinner.
But of course, you get the people that have that.
They know who the thems are, and they'll fill you in on the details. Okay.
So have you pondered that question at all? Obviously there's all these camps, the ETH,
decades.
interdimension.
Absolutely, I've given it thought for 35 years without question.
And, obviously, it's impossible really to come to any conclusions. I know, obviously, some people do. I feel like you obviously haven't. That's what I'm getting at.
I am absolutely clear, Tim, that I don't know what the hell's going on. What I mean by that is I'm in a position to make better educated guesses than a lot of people. And when, I first got myself in a snit about this in the 70s, I was like, every young zealot that ever entered into the field. They're from outer space, power to the people, let us know, confirm it, release what you have. Well, sure, they're from outer space. Are they from the dark side of the moon or Neptune or Pluto? I don't think so. Do they live on Saturn or, under the ground on Mars? I don't know. Are they from way out in the cosmos? Very likely. Alpha Centauri, the Pleiades, the Dog Star, maybe, maybe not. But are they from another dimension?
Right.
Well, maybe. Are they, people that live under us for millennia and have their own civilization and come and go from, very, very remote areas through openings in the earth? Maybe. Are they from other places under our ground? Maybe. Are we under our ground? Definitely. Are they us from a million years in the future coming back to correct a few little tiny errors? For me, when you catch yourself having opened the Pandora's box and then seeing all of the lids to these other Pandora's boxes and saying, well, now that's just silly. They can't be time travelers. I don't think that's, likely, but who the hell am I to say that it's not, because that doesn't wash with me, I don't know. I do know we're not alone. There are other intelligences that come and go with impunity. Certainly some of them possess technology that boggles the human imagination, that they are not only, more than we imagine, to paraphrase a famous quote, but more than we can imagine. And probably, likely, it is a combination. And of the other intelligences, they may well span the gamut in terms of their relationship with this wonderful little speck that shoots through the universe that we call the Earth, that is our home, or with us. We may be somebody's graduate experiment gone horribly wrong. As Stan Friedman once said, the beings that come here, maybe it's okay. Rather than going to jail, on the planet Xenu, you're going to Earth for 5 years. You want to find out what's shaking down? Check that baby out. I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I respect what I don't understand. And every once in a while, and every speaker worth their salt in ufology will bear this out, every once in a while after a talk, people come up to you, nice talk, I've got a question for you, good luck. Somebody will come up to you and say, I thought your talk was very interesting, but, there are 87 different civilizations that are visiting the Earth. And the ones from the Pleiades, this is what they look like. These are the ships that they're in. They eat spiders, mice, and glass. And this is what their philosophy is. And then, of course, you have, the Greys and then the Nordics. And if they don't seem really deranged and don't have you too tightly in the corner, you have several options, which is, gee, that's very interesting. How do you know that? And they have a limited number of answers. I read it in a book, or I saw it in a documentary, or it came to me in a dream, or they told me. And for true believers and folks who adhere to set theory on, welcome the space people, or they're from Venus, or they are from the Pleiades, and I know it because it was confirmed when I read this book, and then, a channeler confirmed it for me. And I'm not saying that, it's just when you get dogmatic and believe in a set theory in this work, it's functionally identical to religion, because you believe, because you have faith. For me, I enter, if I have any value in this field, it's because one of my overt, open, secret weapons is I begin every new investigation as clear-headed and without any agenda as possible. And the reason I say it like that, Tim, is because you and I, Nick, so many good people in the field who have done the work, at a certain point in our investigations, and for me, if I didn't know it earlier, and I certainly did, Rendlesham would be the one that would break the back, and yes, it's real. And if this were a court of law, I could put forward the evidence that Larry and I collected over 9 years and present it the same way that exhibits would be presented in a murder trial, and I am convinced I could sway a jury or a judge or a group of peers beyond any reasonable doubt that it's real. Now, that understood, from that point on, the investigator always suffers from the possibility that because they know it's real, they will, sometimes without even meaning to or wanting to, it will be the secret agenda or the unconscious agenda in their next investigation. And you can't do that. My investigatory model is Arthur Conan Doyle's wonderful Sherlock Holmes character, who I was introduced to at about 12 years old. Conan Doyle was a wonderful writer, and of course Holmes is the detective's detective. And one of the things that made him the legendary literary character he was is he followed a methodology called deductive reasoning. And it's very simple. You begin your investigation looking at the mystery or the crime, what have you, at the lowest phenomenological level. You look for the most boring, mundane explanation possible, and you investigate it fully. And if you're unable to establish that as the cause, you take one tiny step up the ladder. and investigate the second most mundane possibility. Now, this is boring, rote work, but it's the best way to proceed, I think. And for me, I had three real mentors in the field. Best known, Bud Hopkins, certainly. A wonderful retired Hungarian army staff officer who was the chief photo analyst for the Hungarian army during World War II and quite a military scientist. And a tough, no-nonsense Italian Catholic Brooklyn, New York City police detective, Pete Mazzola, who also happened to be a great UFO investigator, may rest in peace. And he taught me to look into such matters the way that cops investigate criminal behavior and felonies. And that model has never failed me. I mean, I certainly haven't been perfect, but again, it's not as sexy as I've got, this inside contact in the Pentagon, or, I've got this secret source in the American intelligence community. I can't tell you who it is or I have to kill you. Or, I've been this 50,000-year-old disembodied spirit was channeled to me in a reading, and I know there's nothing, really neon lights about the way that I work. But the work that I do produce, I think is pretty solid.
Absolutely.
And it's the best way I know to proceed in this field, and also the one that I think ultimately garners the most respect and has the best chance of bringing somebody who's on the borderline or who wants to take it more seriously, but is so conditioned by the media, by government, by popular culture, that, it's flying saucers, for gosh sakes. And, we all know they're not real. And if they are, well, they've never been here, or we'd know it. It would be the biggest event in history to be on the front page of every newspaper in the world. Not.
Yeah, well, what you've been saying kind of makes me also think about something that's been sort of rattling around my head lately, too, and that's just that, regardless of what the them is, when you, acknowledge that they're out there, that changes your worldview. And in a good way, I think, as long as you don't let it get out of control.
Yeah.
Because it can be a humbling, that's how I am, at least. It's a humbling sort of feeling to know that, man isn't the pinnacle of all this.
Yeah, I think so too, Tim. And I think it's important to remember that for a lot of folks, well, for all of us, if you take it down to the hairpins, fear is fear of the unknown. Am I going to get cancer? Is my, boyfriend or girlfriend going to break up with me? Am I going to win the lottery? Are they going to have Social Security by the time I'm eligible? Is an earth fault going to part and all my friends fall into, a giant flaming hole in California? Or am I going to hit by a tornado, which seem to be appreciating all over our wonderful country? But this fear of the unknown, for me, years ago, with something of a smile on my face, I realized in the Western world, pretty much everything is over here. And on this side is sex, death, and UFOs. But yeah, for me, when people get really in your face about it, or sarcastic or condescending or outright, aggressive, that, what kind of grown-up are you wasting your time on this? I try to remember that behind, their posturing and all that nonsense, they're anxious, or they're frightened, or they're challenged. And that usually lets me cut them a little extra slack before they have to chop them in half with words. And, don't mess me with that. So yeah, I think it is humbling. I think overall it is healthy. Look, here we are on this amazing little planet, and this planet is in terrible, terrible trouble. In fact, like a organism that has cancer and is fighting it, this planet has an infestation that is slowly killing it, and we are the infestation. Mm-hmm. We are the enemy of ourselves, and part of it has to do with something that is, it's such a highly charged subject that it splits voters across this country, and it's used to manipulate people like crazy. It is sexuality, procreation, and birth control. We are the victims of over population, and nobody wants to get in the way of anybody having, well, I can have as many kids as I want, and don't get in my face about it. The old feeling way back, and as recently as 100, 200 years ago, is you've got to have a lot of kids, or some of them are going to die when they're young, and you want to have one or two at least to take care of you when you're old.
Yeah.
And that kind of logic has fed the insanity and other things too. The fact that the church mystifies procreation. And, you remember The Life of Brian, that amazing Monty Python movie years ago?
Mm-hmm.
There was a song in there, absolutely deadpan in chorus, that every sperm is sacred.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well, welcome to that world. If we're not going to control ourselves, what I think prevailing thinking is, especially among theologically inclined people, is what we need is a great plague or cataclysms that will level the playing field, and that Bangladesh will be flooded, and that folks in Africa will be wiped out by AIDS, and we can reestablish some farms there, except that it's too late because most of it's desert right now, because we have done so little to conserve. Anyway, on and on. We're off on a tangent here, but it all relates. And again, we need as many shiny objects. Unfortunately, the powers that be need as many shiny objects, whether, again, it's the newest reality series or a so-called serious book that takes our attention away from highly specialized, scholarly, terrific research to underscore the reality of these other intelligences and the technology they possess. And, I can't imagine two and a half men without Charlie Sheen. How is it going to be? And I'm, only half joking here. It's the world we live in, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, all the more reason that for a core of us, this is a noble direction to pursue. And, I am so proud of so many of our colleagues for doing just that and continuing to fight the good fight.
Absolutely. That's what we got to do, because the pool is shrinking, it seems. But I hope for more, the next generation, the young generation. I feel old now myself. I was the young guy when I started out in this thing, but I've been doing this.
Yeah, now you're 87.
Sometimes I feel that way.
Oh, man. While we're kind of coming into the home stretch here, It occurred to me that a paper that I wrote in 2009 that I've revised since, it's that politics, UFOs, and human nature talk. I was able to really do some of, I think, my best work, and it now runs about 40 pages or so.
Oh, wow.
I'm really proud of it. But after the basic introduction, I have several quotes here, and it's a good note to close on. I think it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark, on the question of government investigations of UFOs. It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there. We ought to do it because it's right. We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law. John Podesta, now Presidential Advisor Podesta. Second quote. I've never met Dennis Kucinich, and I don't know Governor Richardson. No, I don't think there are UFOs. No, I don't think the government... What the hell are we talking about? This has gone downhill real quick. Joseph Biden, now Vice President Biden. Last quote. I don't know, and I don't presume to know. What I do know is that there is life here on Earth, and that we are not attending to life here on Earth. Barack Obama, now President Obama.
What do you think that says, though?
I think it says that we have a presidential advisor who is appointed, who takes the subject seriously, and like Governor Richardson before he was kind of forced to back down after Dennis Kucinich, was open enough to report that he had had a UFO sighting with his wife and their friend Shirley MacLaine,
Of course.
while they were in a rural area of California. That we have a healthy point of view there. That we have one politician who thinks it's a big joke and another politician who is evading the subject and probably very unknowledgeable about it, and certainly was at that time. This kind of defines three prevailing power views that are going on. The least effective is Podesta's. Although, he's in there and he's not backing down, but it's not a sexy position. He wasn't elected. He is not a first-tier person whose name we hear every day. He's just somebody in the know on a certain level, where the vice president thinks it's a big joke, and the president has other things to put his attention to. And welcome to the wonderful world of American politics.
Exactly, yeah. That's where we're at nowadays, but you get what you pay for, I suppose, right? Wrapping things up here, what do you have cooking, throughout the rest of 2011 and on the horizon? What do you have on the burner?
I'm putting my affairs in order for the destruction of the world next year. Primarily, giving away possessions and spending my huge savings. Actually, I'm continuing to do what I do. As I mentioned, I have a talk coming up this coming weekend for Western New York MUFON in Buffalo. I'll be speaking at a conference on Nikola Tesla the first weekend in July in Pennsylvania on the life and work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who has had an extraordinary amount of UFO-related observations and work. The second weekend, I'll be speaking for Pennsylvania MUFON in Philadelphia. It's the third weekend, in fact, because Pennsylvania MUFON has something that I think is official in Pennsylvania, which is that the 16th of July is UFO Awareness Day in Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And I will be speaking at a conference in Philadelphia on the strange death of our first Secretary of Defense, who I consider an early casualty of the UFO cover-up, and I think I make a very good case for that. I will be back in England in early September, September 10th, at a conference in Woodbridge, Suffolk. If all goes well, and my fingers are crossed, but I believe it when I see the plane ticket, I will be giving 2 papers at an international conference on the life and work of Wilhelm Reich in central Greece
in
August. Again, that's not absolutely confirmed, but my fingers are crossed.
Nice.
I'll be speaking in Rochester, New York, for a terrific meetup group, and a very, very well organized one in October on the deaths of key authors, investigators, UFO researchers that many folks feel were murdered. And I've spent quite a few years doing a pretty careful analysis of them. Some of them very famous, some of them lesser known. But for me, it was a project that I took very seriously. When I really started to undertake it, I realized I not only had met a few of these people, but that 3 of them were my friends.
Oh, wow.
And I don't mean just, passing acquaintances. They were my friends. And so you better believe I looked into that big time. And, of course, we'll be, back together on the air before then, and I'll give all the particulars for anybody in the Rochester area that might be able to join us here in New York State on that. I know I've got a couple of more talks coming up in Pennsylvania. Bless Pennsylvania MUFON's heart for having me there so often. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this year we'll see the return of the terrific Crash Con, as we call it, the Crash Retrieval Conference that's been held, with the exception of last year, for the previous 7 years in November in Nevada.
Oh, yeah.
That Ryan Wood has done such a great job of organizing over the years. A number of us are waiting to hear from Ryan. And, watching the skies as always, and waiting for the aliens to tell me the next message of the thing I must do.
That's right. And UFO Matrix magazine, people should check that out.
Yeah, I'm a columnist. The column is called On Assignment. The magazine comes out every month. Look for it in your local Barnes & Noble store. It's a good magazine. And, of course, everybody out there should, I think, also be checking out the terrific Open Minds magazine, which continues to hold up great production values and very interesting articles. And, I'm available. I'm not one of those people that hides out. They can get my email address through you. They can come and visit me, maybe be my friend on Facebook. You have a question for me, I'm accessible.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I answer every single one with the best thing I can make up at $5 each.
Oh, man. On that note, it's good to end on a laugh. So it's been great, Peter. I always enjoy talking to you. I got to get you back on. Send me that paper on the UFO-related deaths. I'd love to look at that.
I'll get it out to you tonight in its latest incarnation.
Yeah, we'll discuss that in the future sometime for sure.
Yeah, I'm. It's one of those papers where even though it's copywritten, for anyone that feels that it's important enough to share with a friend, as long as it is intact, it is one of those papers that I'm happy to see go viral, that anybody can post or disseminate or share in any form with anybody they want. And I'll get that to you tonight, Tim.
Oh, yeah, I'd love that.
Cool.
Well, as I said, I love talking to you. We're going to definitely have you on again, in the future. So it's just been great catching up and sort of just having a little jam session here and sort of, pondering the very nature of this mystery.
Indeed, and a pleasure being back with you online. Look forward to getting together with you, hopefully before the end of the year, and let's speak in the next month or so and see if we can put something together for a return maybe late this summer. In the meantime, always a pleasure, Tim. You're a dear friend, a good colleague, and please send my best wishes to your mom.
Absolutely, Peter. It's been great having you on the show again.
Thanks, Tim.
That does it for this edition of BoA Audio Season 6. Big thanks to my good buddy Peter Robbins for coming back on the show. Be sure to check him out on Facebook. Punch in Peter Robbins, and he'll pop right up on the search engine. Then you can find out what he's got cooking for the future and what he has going on in the present. Moving right along now, it's time for BoA Audio listener feedback. We've got 3 emails here, and I'm going to dive right in. But before I do that, let's just take care of the in-house notes. I already told you at the beginning of the show that the big audio migration has happened, so hopefully everybody who has been missing out on the program all these many weeks and months have gotten their BoA Audio fix. The many emails from confused and frightened listeners have ceased. Thank you once again to all the great folks out there who were emailing me over the past couple of months, just pulling their hair out in frustration or confusion as to the missing BoA Audio archives. It was a tenacious project. It was a difficult project, but I am psyched to tell you that it is complete, and BoA Audio continues to live on. Now, let's dive into the BoA Audio listener feedback mailbag. First up, we have a topic suggestion from Kirk, no hometown listed, but here's what he has to say. Here's an offbeat topic for you to consider from Wikipedia. The Beishimo was a steel 1,300-ton cargo steamer built in 1914 in Sweden and owned by the Hudson Bay Company. It was used to trade pelts for provisions in Inuit settlements along the Victoria Island coast of the Northwest Territories of Canada. It became a notable ghost ship along the Alaska coast. And Kirk also cites a book here to check out, Beishimo, Arctic Ghost Ship by Anthony Dalton, and provides a couple of website links for me to check out. And for those folks who want to look into this, the ship name is Beishimo, and that's spelled Baychimo, and there's a very good chance I mispronounced it. Nonetheless, I will definitely look into that. Thank you for writing, Kirk. I appreciate the input and suggestion. We're going way off the beaten path here in Season 6, and I think the Beishimo is certainly something to consider, Although maybe I'd put that under an overall umbrella of ghost ships or inanimate ghost objects, if you will. Ghost trains, ghost cars. Are there ghost cars? I don't know. Maybe ghost planes. That's something worth looking into, but I will sort of dip my toe into the water first, look into the BoA, and see if that can lead us into that area of discussion. So thank you for the suggestion, Kirk. I really do like that one. It's very interesting, raises a lot of interesting questions about the ghost phenomenon if we're seeing ghost ships and, as I created just now fictionally, ghost cars, which I presume actually do exist in some form of anecdotal evidence. What am I talking about? Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to look into this, the BoA, very interesting. Once again, thank you for the topic suggestion, Kirk. Speaking of suggestions, next up we have an email from Chris in Melbourne, Australia. International listener, ring the bell. Thank you for writing in, Chris, all the way from down under. He has a guest suggestion, and here is his email. He says, any chance you can get Joseph Niezgoda, author of The Lenin Prophecy? I have heard him in short 30-minute interviews, and they have always been interesting. Your show format would allow him to touch on many other areas of the Beatles and his book that other shows have not touched. Just an idea I thought I'd pass on. Thanks for the great shows. Always a pleasure to listen to. Cheers, Chris in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you once again for writing in, Chris. Also, another off-the-beaten-path topic here with the Lenin Prophecy. Very interesting. I have heard of Joseph Niezgoda. Also, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that as well. You guys are really challenging me here this week on the program. But I have heard of his stuff. I've heard of the book. I will definitely check that out. I can tell you that I am really close to bringing on a different music conspiracy related guest for the program in the not too distant future. I've already sort of done the research, hoping to bring the guest on the program. It's going to be a wild one if we can get that one in the can. I don't want to tease anything more about it though until that is a go. And I will definitely look into Joseph Niezgoda and his book, The Lenin Prophecy. As I said, I've heard about it. I find it interesting. I definitely would dig that quite a bit. So it's certainly something that is in my wheelhouse, but was not on my radar. So thank you for suggesting it, Chris, and I will definitely check it out. And the final email should give you some food for thought. It comes from John, no hometown listed. A bit of a long one, but definitely worth the read. He says, Shalom. Really enjoy your website. I am a friend of Dr. Mike Heiser, Lynn Marzulli, Richard Hoagland, and others. I do not agree with them about some of their efforts. Dr. Heiser has more knowledge than most. Instead of all the hype about the return of the Nephilim, I teach return of the sons of Elohim, gods, the lesser of the divine kingdom that rebelled the authority of Yahweh, Creator, Father, Most High, Ancient of Eons, etc. These are the ones who did evil with Ha-Adam. The Nephilim were victims and later rulers of injustice. The divine council has many beings of the kingdom. The wrong influence came about by man and these others who came at first to show us how to live. They had orders, but revolted with us. Lawlessness is rampant today. The Ten Commandments are pushed aside for man-made traditions. Jesus said, just as it was in Noah's day, so will it be. It is a shame that Nakash, Shining One, has gotten people to think that Yah's royal commands has been nailed to the cross. Every area of our lives are blessed or doomed by God's set-apart way of life. The scary thing is most are not set apart, but a great part of the great lie. The only hope we have is to trust and obey. Many antichrists are lying to church folk behind pulpit. Thank you for your work, and may His love shine from you. John, no hometown listed. I don't really have anything to say in response to that email. Very interesting stuff. I don't even understand a lot of it. I don't really know what John is saying here. I guess I'd have to ask him to extrapolate and tell us more about his theories here on the Elohim and the Nephilim and this uprising, if you will. Reminds me of the film I'm really excited about, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, for some reason. I don't know. That's just the first thing that popped into my head as I was reading that email. But it was poetic almost, John. So thank you for that. Thought-provoking email, interesting email. I appreciate your writing. Thank you for putting me over and for being a BoA audio listener, sir. And once again, thank you for the very compelling correspondence. So that wraps up BoA audio listener feedback. Thanks to John, thanks to Chris, and thanks to Kirk. If you want to get in touch with me for a future installment of BoA audio listener feedback, that's simple. Just go to binallofamerica.com, BINNALL of America.com, and click the contact button, or write to boaaudio@hotmail.com. And the final method, of course, is to join up at the official BoA forum, theusofE.com, THEUSOFE.com. It is BoA's paranormal playground. Lots of fun going on there, not just talking about the world of the paranormal, but also the world of pop culture and sports. And if you're a part of Facebook or Twitter and you want to hook up via those social networking sites, just punch in Binnall, BINNALL, and I should pop up right away. Feel free to befriend me, follow me, or poke me. It's all good. Up next, let's dole out the thanks to the outstanding and esteemed BoA staff: Leslie, Chiron, Regan Lee, Jovi, Tina Senna, Rochelle Hawks, Richard Thomas, Marla Pena, Bruce Pretty, Tony Morrill, our contributing cartoonist Andy Carolyn, and our webmaster Jeremy Boston. The BoA audio staff has every right to kick my ass because they've been sending me columns over the last few weeks, and I just have not got around to posting them. I've got a slew of columns from just about every writer on the staff waiting to be posted at Binnall of America. So if you're listening to this here in mid-July, be sure to check out BoA for a whole bunch of new stuff from the BoA staff. You guys are awesome, keeping the website afloat even when I don't have time to update it. I humbly apologize, and I cannot wait to unleash your musings on the BoA readers. We say it all the time, my friends, and it is the truth. If you're only listening to BoA audio and you're not reading the columns at Binnall of America, then you're only getting half of the story. BoA, make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. Now comes the part of the program that I don't really feel entirely comfortable with, but it is habit, so let's just do it, and that is, of course, the call for donations. BoA audio has been sporadic at best this season. A lot of it is the technical issues, a lot of it is also my outside work, but it is continuing onward, and we definitely plan on continuing onward beyond season 6. So if you want to help us out, help us keep the whole operation up and running, keep the grease on the wheels, if you will, please make a donation to Binnall of America and BoA audio. You can do that by going to binallofamerica.com and clicking the PayPal button. That's on the left-hand side of the screen. Or you can send us a snail mail donation to Tim Binnall, P.O. Box 232, Pinehurst, Mass. 01866. Once again, that's Tim Binnall, P.O. Box 232, Pinehurst, Pinehurst, Mass. 01866. And if you're going to send us a snail mail donation, please include your email address so I can shoot you a line saying thanks, and make your donation payable to Tim Binnall and not Binnall of America, because my bank is anal and they will not cash those checks. Of course, I know times are tough out there and people are just scraping by, and who knows what's going to happen with the economy here as we go into the late summer and fall. So don't beat yourself up if you can't make a donation. And if you can, we would really appreciate it. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards Binnall of America and BoA audio to help keep the website and the audio series up and running, freely available, and commercial free for all of our great readers and listeners the world over. Next week on the program, and I'm really going to try and make it next week because I'm dying to unleash this episode on the BoA audio listeners, talking about the episode I teased a few weeks ago, Spontaneous Human Combustion, my friends. SpawnCom. We're going to get into this in a huge way. Our guest is Larry Arnold. He has been researching spontaneous human combustion for the last 30 years at least. He is the worldwide authority on SpawnCom. He is a human encyclopedia of SHC. We're going to talk about what it is, the origins of this. How far back does SpawnCom trace? Famous cases in the history of spontaneous human combustion. What the critics say about SHC. How he debunks the debunkers. Really just tons and tons of stuff. This is comprehensive, my friends. It really covers spontaneous human combustion from so many different angles. This is a topic I've wanted to cover on the program for years, and to finally get the worldwide authority on spontaneous human combustion on BoA audio with no time limits and no restrictions was thrilling for me, and I cannot wait to roll it out for all you guys out there. It is definitely going to be an instant classic edition of the program. Larry Arnold talking about spontaneous human combustion next week on BoA Audio. And on that note, let's close the book on this installment of the program. Thanks once again to Peter Robbins for coming back on the program. Check him out on Facebook, folks. Thanks as well to Kirk, Chris, and John for writing in on BoA Audio listener feedback. And finally, of course, big thanks to all you great folks out there, the hardcore BoA Audio listeners. I've already said it a million times. It's been a crazy season, but I can honestly tell you, over the last few months, I've felt better than I have in quite some time about not just the program, but the future of BoA in major areas. We have got some awesome projects in the works, so do not fret, my friends. BoA is poised to head to the next level in the not too distant future, and we owe that really to you guys out there, the hardcore BoA Audio listeners, the folks who have supported us through thick and thin, the people who've been with us since season 1, and the people who picked us up in the last few weeks and have been digging into the archive. You guys are awesome. I would not be doing this without you. I would not be able to do this without you. And your support of this program and this entire enterprise humbles me every time I log on to my computer. You guys are the best. Thank you for making BoA Audio a part of your esoteric audio playlist. Until next time, this is Tim Banal, thanking you for listening and signing off.